The decision to end her freedom was not born overnight but had been brewing in the shadows of whispers and glances for months. The villagers, once enchanted by her rhythm and the way her voice seemed to stir both earth and sky, began to fear her more than they admired her. It started with envy, a gnawing unease in the hearts of those who could not stand that her gift drew the attention of strangers from distant places. They had always been the keepers of tradition, the guardians of order, yet here was a girl whose heartbeat aligned with the sacred pulse of the land itself, and with each song she sang, people listened less to the elders and more to her. At first, they cloaked their jealousy in polite words and tight smiles, but the unease thickened until it became malice. Even her guardians, the ones meant to protect her, were not immune. They had lived all their lives in quiet anonymity, and now their ward's brilliance had made them small and insignificant. The praise she received was a mirror that reflected their own mediocrity, and the sting of that reflection festered until it hardened into cruelty. The plan came quietly. They would not kill her outright, for that would make them murderers, and even in their envy they feared curses from the unseen spirits. Instead, they decided she would be silenced, her gift hidden away, her body made a prisoner of the very rhythm that flowed through her veins. They chose the great ceremonial drum, a massive hollow creation carved from the trunk of an ancient tree, stretched with thick animal hide that echoed like thunder whenever struck. It had been used for generations to summon the village together, a sacred tool of gathering and celebration. To trap her inside it was an act of deep desecration, but their envy blinded them, and they convinced themselves that the act was necessary to preserve the village's order. She had become too bright, too dangerous, they whispered. If her voice could sway the hearts of the young, what might it do to the elders? If her rhythm could draw spirits closer, what if one day they listened only to her? On the night they carried out their plan, the moon was hidden behind thick clouds, and the air was heavy with a silence that felt unnatural. She had trusted them, trusted their summons when they told her she was needed for a special performance at the center of the village. They led her by torchlight, their faces veiled in shadows, their steps strangely hurried. She walked barefoot as she always did, her feet feeling the earth's pulse, her heart humming with an unspoken tune. She did not sense the trap until it was too late. The drum towered before her, its vast surface gleaming in the firelight, its hollow body yawning like the mouth of a beast. Confusion flickered in her eyes, but before she could speak, strong hands seized her arms. Her cry was muffled by the night, swallowed by the chant of those who surrounded her. They lifted her up, pushed her toward the drum's hollow core, her slender body forced into the suffocating darkness. She struggled, her palms pressing against the hide as she tried to resist, but betrayal gave them strength. The ones she had sung to sleep as children, the ones whose burdens she had lightened with song, now shoved her into silence. Her eyes widened as the opening closed behind her, sealing her away, the flickering torchlight cut off as darkness swallowed her whole. The smell of raw wood and stretched hide filled her lungs, and she pounded on the drum's walls, her fists echoing with hollow thunder. But outside, the villagers only nodded grimly to one another, convincing themselves that the muffled beats were nothing more than the drum's spirit accepting her sacrifice. Inside, despair wrapped itself around her like a second skin. Her breath grew shallow in the cramped hollow, her knees pressed against her chest, her palms slick with sweat and blood from her pounding. Tears blurred her vision, though there was nothing to see in that blackness. She whispered songs to herself, not to be heard by the world but to keep the rhythm of her spirit alive, for fear that silence would devour her. Each note trembled in the air around her, reverberating against the wooden chamber, but no one outside cared to listen. They had reduced her gift, her essence, to nothing but an echo in a cage. The betrayal cut deeper than the physical confinement. It was not just the villagers, not just their fear, but the faces of those she had once loved that haunted her thoughts. She remembered their eyes, avoiding hers as they closed the drum, their mouths tight with shame but their hands firm with cruelty. They had chosen silence over her voice, chosen order over her truth. The despair that coursed through her veins burned hot, but beneath it flickered a strange, smoldering ember, a refusal to let their malice be the final note of her story. Even in despair, she felt the rhythm beneath her, steady and patient, a reminder that no drumbeat could be silenced forever. The darkness inside the drum was absolute, a heavy shroud that smothered her from every angle. There was no sliver of light, no faint outline to orient herself, only the press of wood and hide enclosing her in a coffin that still breathed. At first, she tried to steady herself, to believe this was only a cruel dream that would soon end, but the silence was too thick, too real. She pressed her palms against the curved walls, her skin meeting the cold stretch of animal hide, and pushed, hoping it would yield. but the drum did not budge. Instead, the force of her movements echoed back in hollow vibrations, reminding her of the prison that now held her. Each attempt to shift her body left her more cramped, her chest tighter, her limbs pressed awkwardly against the rounded interior. Fear swelled in her like an unstoppable tide. Her stomach began to growl, the pangs of hunger clawing at her insides. Hours had passed, though how many she could not tell. Her body felt weaker with every moment, her throat dry and burning. She tilted her head back, pressing it against the inner surface of the drum, and wept. Her tears slid down her cheeks and dripped onto the hide beneath her, soaking into it as though the drum itself were drinking her sorrow. Each drop landed with the faintest thud, the sound mingling with the strange resonance of the hollow chamber. The more she cried, the wetter the surface became, until her hands, pressed against the hide, felt damp with the weight of her grief. It was as if the drum was swallowing her pain and embedding it into its skin. Her breath came in shallow gasps, the air inside hot and stale. She pressed her lips against the hide, desperate for a sliver of freshness, but it gave her nothing. Her lungs ached, each inhale a struggle, each exhale heavier than the last. The silence around her was not empty but oppressive, pressing into her ears until she could hear nothing but the faint pulse of her own heartbeat. That rhythm, once strong and lively, now sounded faint, fragile. She pressed her hand to her chest and felt it. Thud, 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 slower than it should have been, yet steady enough to remind her she was still alive. Her heartbeat merged with the silence, became a drumbeat of its own, filling the hollow with a strange music no one outside could hear. As her hunger deepened, her mind began to wander. Shadows of memory slipped in and out of the suffocating dark. She thought of the times when her rhythm had carried joy through the village, how children had danced barefoot in the dust as she sang. She thought of the elders' faces, stern yet softened when her voice touched them. The betrayal stung sharper with each remembrance. She had given them music, laughter, and light, and in return they had given her silence, hunger, and despair. Her body curled tighter as though folding in on itself, and for a moment she wondered if she would simply disappear into nothingness. Yet even as her spirit wavered, the drum began to hum with her presence. Every sob, every gasp, every trembling heartbeat seemed to seep into its skin, filling the chamber with vibrations she could not explain. The wood creaked faintly, not from pressure but from resonance, as though it were responding to her suffering. She pressed her ear against the wall and for the first time thought she heard something beyond her own body, a faint answering beat, slow and deep, like the earth itself replying to her despair. The sound frightened her, yet also comforted her. She was not entirely alone, something was listening. Exhaustion took her like a tide, dragging her down into half-sleep. Her dreams were feverish, filled with visions of endless forests where every tree was hollow and booming with drumbeats. In her visions, her own tears rained down as rivers, soaking the ground until it pulsed with rhythm. She saw the villagers' faces twisted with fear as unseen hands struck the drum she was trapped in, the sound rolling through the land like thunder. She woke with a start, her body slick with sweat, her chest aching, only to realize that her tears had once again drenched the hide beneath her. The silence grew heavier, and so did the dark, until she no longer knew if her eyes were open or closed. She whispered her name into the drum, hoping it might remember her when she herself could not. Her voice sounded foreign, faint and broken. Still, it echoed inside the chamber, layering with her heartbeat, creating a fragile melody that no one else would ever hear. That small sound, weak as it was, kept her tethered to herself. Her body trembled from weakness, yet something inside her began to shift. The hunger gnawed, the suffocation threatened, but she realized she had not surrendered. Every tear, every breath, every beat of her heart had soaked into the drum's skin. Her suffering was no longer just her own, it was being carried, absorbed, transformed into something else. The darkness did not feel as empty now. It felt alive, as if waiting. At first, the sound was faint, so faint it could have been imagined, a dull echo of her chest against the drum's hollow walls. Her strength was nearly gone, her body weak from hunger and thirst, her tears long since dried. She had curled into herself, a small shape inside the vast emptiness, her breathing shallow and ragged. Her heart, though, refused to stop. It thudded on, stubbornly, even as her mind slipped in and out of waking. That sound, quiet yet insistent, began to grow. Thud, thud, thud. It was her own heartbeat, magnified by the chamber that held her prisoner. The drum caught it, carried it, and released it into the air in a vibration that traveled through wood, hide, and earth. The villagers, scattered around the night fires, froze when they first heard it. The drum they had locked her into had been silent since the moment they sealed it. No hands had struck its skin, no musician had sat before it, yet now, in the stillness of night, it spoke. A single beat, low and resonant, rolled across the air like distant thunder. They looked at each other uneasily, whispering that perhaps it was only the wind or a trick of the night, but the sound came again, louder, steadier, impossible to ignore. The ground itself seemed to hum with the vibration. The children huddled closer to their mothers, while the elders stared into the shadows, unsettled. Inside the drum the girl felt it too. Her body trembled as her chest pounded against her ribs, yet it no longer felt like weakness. Each pulse reverberated back to her, filling her ears with rhythm. Her suffering, her despair, had merged with the very skin of the drum, and now the instrument had chosen to answer her. In the stillness she heard something else, an answering rhythm that did not belong to her. It came like a whisper at first, carried in the vibrations of the air, then like a voice made not of words but of sound. The spirits had heard her and they were responding. The first drumbeat was hers, born of pain and survival. The second came from beyond, deeper and stronger, as though the earth itself had struck the hide. Then another and another. The rhythms intertwined, her fragile heartbeat braided with the thunder of the unseen. Together they created a music that was unlike anything human hands had ever played. It was not a song of joy or celebration, it was the sound of something ancient stirring. The villagers' fear thickened. Women pressed their palms to their chests, murmuring prayers, while men tried to mask their unease with hard faces. But every beat unsettled them further, crawling beneath their skin, seizing their breath. The elders exchanged tense glances, remembering the old tales, stories of spirits that answered grief, of drums that carried the voices of the wronged. None had believed such tales until now, yet the sound was undeniable. The girl inside lifted her trembling hands and pressed them to the walls. She could feel the rhythm moving through her palms, not only her own pulse but the mighty answer of something far greater. Her tears welled again, not from sorrow but from awe. She was no longer alone in the dark. The spirits had come to her side, not with words but with music that wrapped around her, stronger than hunger, stronger than fear. Then came the moment that made the villagers recoil in dread. The first clear, thunderous beat rolled through the village with such force that the ground seemed to quake. Firelight flickered and bent as though caught in a sudden gust of unseen wind. Dogs howled, chickens flapped wildly in their coops, and even the trees shuddered, their leaves rustling without cause. The villagers stumbled back, their faces pale, whispering that the drum had awakened. Children covered their ears, but the sound pierced through everything, impossible to shut out. It was not only heard but felt, in their bones, in the marrow of their fear. Each beat carried with it the weight of the girl's suffering, magnified by the spirit's power. The villagers who had betrayed her now heard their crime given voice, each strike a reminder of the cruelty they had sealed inside the drum. The girl's heart raced, stronger than before, fueled by a force beyond her own. For the first time since her imprisonment she no longer felt weak. The darkness around her pulsed with life, every surface vibrating with rhythm. She closed her eyes and though she could not see them, she felt the spirits standing with her. They lifted her heartbeat, transformed it, turned it into a voice that would not be silenced. The first drumbeat had fallen upon the village and with it, dread had taken root. It was no longer the silence of the night that haunted them, but the steady, relentless rhythm of justice awakening. Her body had nearly broken, her spirit had nearly withered, yet in the drum's suffocating darkness, something new began to stir. At first it was only her heartbeat amplified into echoes, but soon the sound swelled into waves that made the air tremble around her. Her sorrow, heavy as chains, started to change. It no longer pressed her down, it became a force that lifted her. Each tear that had soaked into the drum's hide now burned like an ember, and those embers spread through her veins. Her grief was no longer a weakness. It was fuel. The drumbeat grew louder, deeper, carrying with it the weight of her pain. Boom, boom, boom. The sound was no longer the frail rhythm of a dying girl but the roar of something ancient, something vast. Every strike against the hide of the drum made the ground outside quiver, rattling stones and shaking huts. Villagers clutched their mats and doors, trembling at the vibrations that refused to stop. They whispered that the girl was dead, that it must be the spirits, and in that they were both wrong and right. Inside she felt her body change. Her weakness was still there, hunger gnawed at her belly, thirst burned her throat, but beneath those wounds surged a strength that was not hers alone. It filled her arms, her legs, her chest, coursing through her blood like fire. Her small form, once curled in despair, now stretched, her spine straightening as though unseen hands were lifting her. She pressed her palms to the drum's walls, and the hide quaked beneath her touch, answering her like a living thing. Visions flickered before her closed eyes. She saw shadows of great spirits, their shapes shifting like smoke and flame. They circled her, not with pity but with reverence, as if recognizing her as something more than the helpless child who had been cast away. She felt them place their power upon her shoulders, their whispers guiding her, their strength feeding into her bones. She understood without words. She had been chosen, not abandoned. Outside, the villagers gathered in clusters, their faces pale in the firelight. Every beat from the drum seemed to shake their hearts in their chests. Some fell to their knees, clutching the earth as if it might open and swallow them. Others covered their ears, but no cloth or hand could block the sound. The rhythm passed through flesh and bone, through huts and trees, sinking into the soil itself. Even the air shivered with it. The girl's sorrow flared brighter, transforming into rage wrapped in justice. Every memory of betrayal, every cruel laugh, every hand that had sealed her fate fed the rhythm inside the drum. The spirits pulled at those memories, sharpening them into blades of energy that struck with every beat. Her heart was no longer alone in the darkness. It was joined by the pounding steps of spirits older than memory. Together they created a rhythm that was unstoppable. Her breathing steadied, no longer ragged and weak but deep, resonant, carrying the rhythm in and out of her lungs. She opened her eyes to the darkness and saw it glowing faintly, as though the air itself burned with unseen fire. The drumbeat was no longer only sound, it was light, a vibration that shimmered against the hide, sending sparks across its surface. She lifted her hand and felt the heat of it, not painful but powerful, like the warmth of the sun held close. The earth outside quaked more violently. Pots cracked open, water spilled, and roofs shook as if storms were passing above. Yet the sky remained clear. It was not weather. It was her. The villagers, terrified, realized the truth they had ignored. The girl had not been silenced. She had been awakened. The very act meant to destroy her had made her a vessel for forces they could never hope to command. Inside, she whispered to herself, not words of fear but a vow. She would not remain forgotten. She would not die nameless in darkness. Her voice, carried by the drum, would reach every ear that had turned away. Her fire, born of pain, would spread through the same hands that had cast her aside. And as she whispered, the spirits answered in rhythm, the drumbeat growing faster, louder, like the march of an approaching army. The people clutched each other, begging the elders for answers, but the elders had none. Their old stories spoke of spirits who answered injustice, but never had they heard it so clearly, so violently. The girl inside the drum was no longer merely human, she was becoming something greater, something terrible and divine. Every beat declared it, each one heavier than thunder. Her sorrow had been reshaped. Where once it had chained her, now it roared as power. The unseen hands of the spirits held her steady, fed her strength, and ignited her heart into a flame that no hunger or fear could smother. She sat in the suffocating darkness, yet she glowed brighter than fire. Her time of helplessness was over. The drum, once her prison, had become her throne of awakening, and the world beyond its walls would soon learn the cost of her suffering. The sound never stopped. Night after night, the drumbeat carried over the village, steady, relentless, like a pulse that belonged not to one girl but to the earth itself. At first, the villagers told themselves it was only noise, a haunting rhythm that meant nothing more than sleepless nights. But then the signs began to show. The morning after the first true thunder of the drum, they found their fields strangely pale. Leaves that had been green only yesterday were tinged with yellow, as if life had been drained from them overnight. The stalks of millet bent low, and the bean plants curled as though scorched by an unseen fire. By the third day, whole rows of crops had blackened, their roots shriveled in the soil, unfit to harvest. The farmers cursed the weather, though the sun shone steady and the rain had not failed. Others whispered that it was the girl, that each beat of the drum carried her sorrow out into the land, poisoning what had once fed them. Still, many laughed bitterly, saying it was coincidence, bad luck, or the anger of the gods. Yet when the next beat came, louder than before, another misfortune followed. The animals were the first to feel it. Goats bleated in terror as though chased by predators unseen. Chickens refused to roost, flapping wildly at night until their feathers fell loose. By morning, a dozen were found dead in their coops, their eyes clouded, their bodies cold. Dogs, once loyal companions, turned restless, howling at the direction of the drum, their cries echoing with something that chilled the heart. Even the cattle, strong and slow to fear, grew thin, their ribs pressing against their hides though the pastures were full. The villagers could not explain it. The more the drumbeat echoed, the more the creatures fell silent forever. And then it turned on the people themselves. The ones who had sealed her inside the drum were the first to feel it. One man who had bound the ropes across the hide woke drenched in sweat, his body burning with fever. No herb, no prayer cooled him. His voice cracked as he raved through the night, begging unseen hands to forgive him, until at last the fever stole his breath. His widow whispered that, in his last moments, he cried of hearing the drumbeat inside his own chest. Another, the woman who had spoken loudest in favor of silencing the girl, collapsed in the market. Her hands, once strong, twisted into claws, her legs gave way and she lay gasping on the ground. The people who rushed to help her stopped when they noticed the strange marks rising across her skin, dark, circular welts, like the impressions of drumsticks striking flesh. Her screams echoed with the rhythm they all feared, each cry landing in time with the beats that rolled across the air. She did not rise again. Fear spread like wildfire. Neighbors who once gathered to gossip and laugh now huddled in silence, ears straining for the sound that had become inescapable. Mothers pulled children close, fathers searched the edges of the village for answers, but none came. The elders tried to pray, but even their voices trembled with doubt. Some argued that the girl had become a vessel of spirits, others that she was a curse sent by their enemies. None dared admit the truth that lay beneath their fear. This was the price of cruelty and the rhythm was justice. Every new misfortune carried the weight of proof. A hut caught fire without flame, the roof collapsing under sparks that no hand had set. Water jars cracked down the middle, spilling their contents as though split by invisible blows. The paths to the river grew unsafe, trees bending and groaning, branches snapping in storms that had no wind. And always the sound followed, boom, boom, boom. Each beat was like the toll of a bell, announcing another blow to their survival. The villagers began destroying drums, hoping to silence the curse. They tore apart every instrument, smashing hides, burning wood, throwing shards into the river. Yet it made no difference. The sound came not from those drums but from the one they had sealed, from the girl who remained within. Every strike they made against their own drums only reminded them of their helplessness. Hunger followed swiftly. With crops rotting and animals dying, food grew scarce. Mothers wailed as they struggled to feed their children, men grew restless and angry, and blame turned like a blade through the air. Some whispered that the only way to stop it was to release the girl, though others shouted that she was no longer human, that opening the drum would bring only greater doom. The arguments grew heated, yet all were silenced when the drumbeat rolled again, stronger than before. This time the very earth beneath their feet split, a crack tearing through the village square, spilling dust into the air. Children screamed, clutching their mothers, and even the proudest elders fell to their knees. The girl inside the drum felt it all. She no longer trembled with weakness, she could feel the strength of the spirits in every breath. Her sorrow had become a storm, and the drum was the thunder that carried it forth. With each beat she sensed the villagers' fear rising, their lives unraveling, their cries echoing her own from the days they had ignored. Yet she did not smile, nor did she laugh. Her face was calm, her eyes closed, her body swaying in rhythm. She was not the hand of cruelty. She was balance. The curse unfolded not as chaos, but as justice written in sound. Every misfortune was a measure in the song of retribution, every death a note in the rhythm of sorrow and rage. And the village, helpless before it, could do nothing but listen as their world fell apart, one drumbeat at a time. The village had become a place of silence by day and terror by night. No one sang, no one laughed, no one spoke above a whisper. Every breath, every movement, was taken in the shadow of that sound. Boom, boom, boom. It rolled across the earth in steady rhythm, slow and merciless, like the march of doom itself. At first, it had been only unsettling, an eerie noise echoing from the drum. But now weeks had passed and the villagers had come to understand the truth. Each beat carried weight. Each one came with misfortune, failed harvests, dead animals, sickened neighbors. They had prayed, fasted, pleaded, but the drum did not stop. The girl inside did not speak, yet her silence was louder than any scream. The rhythm was her voice, and the spirits had chosen to amplify it until no one could escape. By the time the first snows touched the earth, the villagers had reached their breaking point. The men gathered in the square, their faces gaunt with hunger and sleepless nights. Their eyes were hollow, not only from starvation but from dread. The children had grown thin, their laughter extinguished. The women wore expressions of sorrow deeper than age. And still the drumbeat went on. Each man looked to the other, searching for someone to take the burden of speaking first. Finally, one of the elders, his voice cracked from weeks of silence, rose to his feet. "We cannot live like this," he said, his words trembling as though spoken to something unseen. "The curse eats us alive. The girl must be silenced forever." A ripple of unease spread across the gathering. Some nodded, eager to end the torment, while others looked down at their feet, knowing such an attempt could only end in disaster. But desperation makes courage of even the most fearful, and desperation was all they had left. The decision was made: the drum must be destroyed. That night, under a sky empty of stars, they approached it. The drum sat in the center of the village, larger than any other, its hide stretched taut, its frame carved from the oldest tree. To any stranger, it might have looked like an object of worship, but to them it was a prison, a curse, the mouth through which spirits spoke. Torches lit their way, though the men carrying them trembled as they walked. Women and children stood at their doorways, clutching one another, whispering prayers, afraid to look yet unable to turn away. The drumbeat continued. Boom, boom, boom. The sound vibrated through their bones, rattling their teeth, crawling across their skin. Every step closer made the beat louder, until it seemed to pound directly within their chests. Some men stumbled, clutching their hearts, but still they moved forward. They circled the drum as though it were an enemy beast, too powerful to strike carelessly. One man, the youngest among them, raised his hammer first. His hands shook as he lifted it high. He hesitated, his breath ragged, and for a moment, it seemed he would collapse under the weight of his own fear. But the others shouted at him to strike, to free them, to end this madness. With a cry, he brought the hammer down against the drum's side. The sound that followed was not the thud of wood against hide, nor the crack of breaking skin. It was a roar. The drum absorbed the strike and sent it back, magnified tenfold. A thunderous boom exploded outward, shaking the ground, toppling torches, and throwing the man backward into the dust. He lay still, smoke rising faintly from his body, his hammer clutched in lifeless fingers. The women screamed, the children cried, and the men recoiled, their faces pale with horror. The drumbeat continued, now louder, faster. Boom, boom, boom. Panic spread through the crowd, but desperation does not die easily. Another man, his face twisted with rage, grabbed an axe. "It is only wood and hide," he shouted. "It can be broken." He charged, swinging the axe with all his strength. The blade struck, but instead of tearing, it bounced back, the vibration running up his arms, splitting his bones with invisible force. His scream pierced the air as the axe fell from his shattered hands. Blood dripped from his fingers, his arms bent in unnatural ways, yet still the drum stood untouched, unbroken, its sound steady as ever. The villagers wailed, but others refused to give in. One after another, men tried. They used hammers, axes, spears, even fire. Each strike, each flame, was swallowed whole by the drum and spat back as sound, louder, stronger, until the entire village quaked. Roofs collapsed, pots shattered, animals shrieked in terror. The fire they lit to consume it turned against them, leaping from torch to hut, forcing them to scatter in chaos. Still the drum remained. And the girl within? She heard it all. Each strike sent vibrations through her prison, but instead of pain she felt strength. The spirits were with her, their hands steadying her, their voices humming in rhythm with her heart. With every attempt to destroy the drum, her power grew. Her sorrow had already transformed into strength, but now it was becoming something more. She could feel the villagers' fear feeding into the rhythm, each desperate blow adding to the energy around her. They thought they were fighting her, but they were fueling her. Outside, the people fell to their knees, their hands pressed to their ears. The sound had grown. Unbearable, echoing through their bones, rattling inside their skulls until it felt as if their very blood pulsed in rhythm with the cursed drum. Children cried out in agony, begging for the noise to stop, but no hand could silence it. Men screamed, clawing at their ears, their voices drowned in the endless thunder. Some fainted, their bodies twitching on the ground as though struck by lightning. The elders, their voices breaking, begged the spirits for mercy. They offered sacrifices, grain, animals, even trinkets of gold and bone, but the drum ignored them. It wanted no offerings. The beat only grew stronger, as if laughing at their feeble attempts. The people realized then the terrible truth: there was no undoing what had been done. They had sealed the girl in cruelty, and now their every effort to erase her suffering only amplified it. The curse was alive, and it had no intention of ending until justice was complete. Hours passed, though it felt like days. The villagers lay strewn across the square, some unconscious, others too weak to rise. The torches had all burned out, leaving only the moon's pale light and the glow of the drum itself, which now shimmered faintly as though lit from within. The rhythm slowed again, steady and deliberate, each beat echoing like a death knell. The people who remained awake sobbed quietly, their bodies shaking with exhaustion and fear. The girl inside the drum opened her eyes. They glowed faintly in the darkness, reflecting the fire the spirits had lit within her. She pressed her hand against the hide, and for a moment, the villagers swore they saw the outline of her palm pushing through, glowing red like embers beneath the surface. The beat quickened at her touch, rattling their bones, making the ground split in small cracks beneath them. The villagers crawled back, screaming her name, begging her to stop, promising forgiveness, swearing they had only been afraid. But their pleas were too late. The drumbeat was no longer hers alone. It was the rhythm of the spirits, the sound of sorrow turned into power, the echo of justice that could not be silenced. Every attempt to break the drum had only proven what the spirits already knew. The cruelty of men always rebounds, louder, heavier, crushing those who inflict it. The villagers had struck the drum to silence her, but now it was the drum that spoke, and its voice was louder than all their cries combined. As dawn broke, the survivors staggered away from the square. Their faces were hollow, their ears still ringing, their bodies trembling. They knew they had lost. The drum stood untouched, unbroken, its skin shining faintly in the morning light. The beat slowed to a steady pulse once more, softer but no less terrifying. It was not silence, nor was it victory. It was a warning. The curse was not over. The breaking point had come and it had passed. The villagers had tried to fight the drum, but all they had done was prove their own helplessness. Now they lived in the shadow of its sound, powerless, waiting for the rhythm to decide when their end would come. And inside, the girl sat in silence, her body calm, her spirit burning, her heart one with the thunder. She no longer wept. She no longer feared. She was the drum and the drum was her. The air grew heavier with each passing night, as though the very sky bowed under the weight of the drum's rhythm. The villagers, broken and trembling, no longer tried to silence it. They had learned that every attempt only strengthened its voice. Now they huddled in their huts, listening, praying, hoping the sound would fade. But instead of fading, it transformed. The beats were no longer random, no longer only thunderous pulses of doom. They became deliberate, structured, like the steps of a sacred dance, like the heartbeat of the earth itself. The villagers began to hear patterns in the sound, as if the drum carried a language they could almost understand. At first it was terrifying, but slowly, awe began to take root. For they realized this was not the echo of their victims' suffering anymore. This was something greater, something older. One night, as the moon rose full and silver, the rhythm shifted entirely. It grew deep, resonant, layered, as though 100 hands struck in perfect unison. With each beat, shadows seemed to ripple across the village ground, taking shape, rising into forms. They were not human nor beast but something beyond both, tall figures woven from smoke and moonlight, their eyes glowing like embers. The villagers fell to their knees, clutching the earth, too afraid to look directly but unable to turn away. The spirits had come. The girl's voice, though her lips did not move, carried through the rhythm. She was no longer a prisoner inside the drum. She was the drum. Her sorrow had been transformed into something purer, sharper. Each beat was her judgment, and the spirits gave it shape. She was not weeping anymore, she was commanding. The first beat summoned balance. A farmer who had mocked her suffering cried out as his body lifted from the ground, pulled into the air by invisible hands. His chest rose and fell in time with the rhythm, and when the beat struck hard he collapsed, coughing out soil. His lungs had filled with the very earth he had once denied her. The second beat summoned vengeance. A woman who had laughed when the thorns tore her knees staggered as her legs buckled beneath her. Her bones cracked with each strike of the drum until she crawled on the ground, bloodied and broken, tasting the pain she had once applauded. The third beat summoned truth. The elders who had turned blind eyes, found their tongues tied in knots, their mouths unable to speak. The drum silenced them as it had silenced her, showing them the weight of their cowardice. The villagers cried out for mercy, but the rhythm was steady, unrelenting. The spirits had no use for excuses. They revealed themselves fully, moving in a circle around the drum, their forms pulsing with light. They were not cruel, they were precise. Their hands did not strike in rage, but in balance, in harmony with the girl's heart. The sound was justice, neither hurried nor delayed. And through it all, the girl's spirit remained calm. She no longer felt the sting of thorns or the humiliation of mockery. That pain had been burned away, reshaped into rhythm. Where once her body had bled, now her soul soared. She was not a victim anymore, she was a voice, and through her, the spirits spoke what the world had long forgotten. Cruelty always calls forth its answer. The beat slowed, steady as breath. Boom, boom, boom. The villagers began to see visions with every sound. They saw fields that had been barren bloom with flowers at the edge of the cursed drum. They saw rivers swell where once they had dried. They saw ancestors standing tall among the spirits, nodding in solemn approval. For while vengeance was being carried out, balance was also being restored. Those who had not raised hands against the girl were spared, though even they trembled under the weight of the sound. They felt the pain of the rhythm, but it did not break them. Instead, it left a mark inside them, a reminder of what had been done, and of what must never be repeated. The spirits were not here only to punish, they were here to teach. By dawn, the figures of smoke and moonlight began to fade, their outlines dissolving back into the morning mist. The rhythm slowed further, until it became almost gentle, a heartbeat fading into silence. For the first time in many moons, the village was quiet. But that quiet was not peace, it was memory. The drum remained unbroken, untouched, resting in the center of the square. Its skin glowed faintly as though fire still burned beneath, and the villagers dared not approach. They knew now that it was no mere object. It was a living testament, a voice that would never die. The girl was gone from flesh, but her spirit was eternal. She had become the keeper of balance, her rhythm carrying the justice of the unseen. From that day forward, the villagers changed. No hand dared strike the innocent again for fear the drum would awaken. No laugh was given at another's pain, for the memory of those beats still echoed in their bones. When children asked about the sound they sometimes heard on quiet nights, soft, faint, like a heartbeat in the distance, the elders told them the truth. It was not a curse but a warning. A voice of justice, summoning harmony, reminding all who listened that cruelty carries a rhythm, and that rhythm will always return. The girl who had been silenced was silenced no longer. She was the drum, the rhythm, the voice of the spirits. She was justice itself. The village did not recover. Even after the spirits had vanished into mist and the thunder of the cursed drum faded into the silence of dawn, the people remained paralyzed by the echoes that haunted their ears and hearts. They tried to return to their daily lives, lighting fires, drawing water, tending the animals that had survived, but nothing felt the same. The earth itself seemed to carry memory. The soil turned brittle, the once rich fields bore little grain, and every rustle of leaves carried the phantom of a drumbeat that made them shiver. The drum remained in the center of the square, an object no one dared to touch. At first it was feared, treated like a living being too sacred and too dangerous to be disturbed. Villagers built a wide circle around it, leaving space so that no home or structure stood close to its presence. When children, out of ignorance or curiosity, crept near, their parents would drag them away, warning them never to step within its shadow. The memory of what had happened was enough to silence all arguments. Weeks turned into months and the village fell deeper into despair. People whispered at night that the drum sometimes pulsed with a faint glow, as if embers smoldered beneath its hide. Others swore they heard low, distant rhythms when the moon was full, a heartbeat that stirred the ground beneath their feet. Some claimed they heard her voice woven into the sound, gentle, sorrowful, but unyielding. Each whisper of her presence drove the people further into fear. And then one morning the drum was gone. No one saw who carried it away, no one heard footsteps or wagon wheels, and no path showed signs of its removal. It had simply vanished, leaving behind only the scorched earth where it had once stood. Panic swept through the village. The elders declared that the spirits themselves had reclaimed it, returning it to the wilderness, where no hand could misuse it. Others whispered that the girl, no longer bound to mortal flesh, had walked away carrying it on her back, searching for new places where cruelty hid. Whatever the truth, its disappearance became as chilling as its presence. The villagers understood that the drum had not been destroyed, and it had not been silenced. It was waiting. Somewhere in the world, its rhythm would rise again. The village's decline quickened after that. The crops continued to fail, families abandoned their homes, and slowly the once thriving settlement emptied into silence. Roofs caved in, walls crumbled, and weeds consumed the narrow pathways. In the heart of that ruin, the memory of the drum remained heavier than stone. The village became a ghost, spoken of only in hushed tones by travelers who passed the overgrown paths. But stories have their own rhythm, and like drumbeats they carry across distances farther than any traveler's step. The legend of the girl spread from mouth to mouth, from village to village, woven into fireside tales and sung in lullabies that both soothed and warned children. Parents told their little ones not to mock the weak, for their cries could become a rhythm that even spirits would answer. Elders reminded gatherings that cruelty planted its own curse, that the sound of injustice never dies but waits, echoing in the earth until the time comes for it to rise again. The girl was no longer remembered simply as a victim. She became something more, an eternal presence, a spirit with rhythm in her hands and fire in her voice. Some called her the Drum Maiden. Others whispered she was the drum spirit, a voice of the ancestors who had been awakened by cruelty. Her name, if it had once been spoken, was lost, replaced by titles that grew with every retelling. In some villages, they claimed she walked through the wilderness carrying her drum, punishing the cruel wherever she found them. In others, they said she lay sleeping in a hidden cave, waiting for another cry of injustice to wake her. In places where oppression was rife, whispers of her story became louder. People who were mistreated prayed at night, striking their hands upon the earth in rhythm, calling her name though they did not know it. They believed the beat would travel through soil and roots, reaching her ears, and that she would rise again to bring justice. And sometimes strange things happened after such prayers. Oppressors would wake to find their fields turned barren. Bullies would stumble, breaking bones with no clear reason. Drums and ritual dances would sometimes shift their tones, carrying notes no human hand had struck. Those who heard such changes would whisper, "She is listening."